Hello everyone and welcome back to the YellowDog 3D tips blog. Today I'm going to go through how to create simple clean plates inside of Nuke, and a clean plate is just basically getting rid of anything from the shot that you didn't want to be there. In this case we've got a guy walking into the shot who we didn't want there, so we need to get rid of him. So to do that we're going to jump into Nuke, and straight away in Nuke I've got my footage, and I also have this little grid which is shot with the same lens. We use it to get rid of lens distortion. And if you want to learn more about this, just watch the Match Moving YellowDog 3D tips blog, and I go into it in much more detail there. So straight away we're going to drop in a lens distortion node, and once that's in we need to connect it to the grid. It's accidentally connected to the wrong one. And once we have the node we're going to double click it and go to grid analysis, choose thin line from the drop down and just click analyze grid. And once this runs through you'll see that the footage sort of gets a bit bigger, and that's just getting rid of all the distortion created by the lens. And if we repipe that back into the footage, you'll see that it's just straightened out all the lines and made it so that we can actually camera solve this. But before we camera solve, we need to roto out all of the moving objects in the scene, or people. So in this shot we've got this guy juggling, we've got these reflections which probably won't track properly, and we've got the guy walking into the scene. So in the roto node, just start drawing around one of the characters or objects in your scene that you want to paint out. In Nuke you can just start drawing your roto and everything's automatically keyframed, so if I skip ahead in the timeline, like I'm going to do now, I can simply just reposition this. You can select it all at once if you like. I'm just going to start repositioning it and it will automatically start keyframing between those two different roto shapes we just created. And we're essentially just creating a garbage matte, which is a pretty inaccurate sort of mask of the area. We don't have to worry too much about the juggling balls coming in and out of the shot, because we'll take care of that in the camera solve settings later on. So I'm just going to speed this part up, because if you're watching this tutorial you probably already know how to rotoscope and it's extremely tedious to watch. So once we have our rotoscope set up, what we need to do is go into the node attributes and change the output to none and the pre-multiply setting to RGBA, and you'll see that that starts to cut out the shape. I'm just going to refine that a little bit, it's a little bit easier to see. And just clicking this little checkbox here, in the Bezier options, we'll just invert it. So we've essentially just cut him out of the shot. And I'm going to drop in another roto node after the initial roto, and I'm going to just cut the other guy out of the shot. So I'm going to find the point where he is sort of in the middle of his move, which is around here. And again, through the magic of editing, I will speed this up so you don't have to watch the tedious rotoscope process. So the next thing we need to take care of is the reflections in this window, which will mess up the camera solve. This matted window is kind of okay, the frosted glass, that won't cause too many problems. So if we just add in another roto node, and I'm just going to disable the old ones by just hitting D, and all I'm going to do is go to the start of the footage, and I'm just going to draw sort of a box within this window, and we're just going to planar track this, which will basically automatically rotoscope this area for us. So just right click the Bezier and click planar track, and open up that node, and literally just hit forwards, and that will go through the entire video and do its best job at sticking to this glass and just automatically rotoscoping for you. So I'll skip this on, there we go, and let's look how that did. As you can see, it's done a pretty good job. It has started to drift out towards the middle, but we can just simply correct that and it'll sort of correct it across the board. And now that we're happy with that, I'm just going to close this planar track node, and in the roto node I'm going to change the output to none and the pre-multiply to RGBA, and then click invert. And I'm just going to re-enable the other nodes, and let's have a look at what we've got. So it looks to me like we've done a pretty good job of garbage matting out all of the moving parts. So the next thing that we're going to do is just camera solve this scene. So straight after the roto I'm going to put a camera tracker in, and we're just going to change the default settings a little bit. If we go into the film back preset and your camera is listed in here, make sure that you select it, and this will just put the sensor size in automatically for you, which really helps the camera solve. In lens distortion, just put unknown lens, because we've already sorted the lens distortion out. And now I'm just going to change the minimum length of the track, and because we've got all these juggling balls sort of coming in and out of the shot, I'm going to put this to 25, so it doesn't attempt to track anything that's not on screen for less than 25 frames. And I've just put the track threshold to 0.9, which will just get rid of any tracks that have quite a lot of error on them. Once we've got this, we can leave everything else as default, and I'm just going to hit track, and we'll just let this run through. So as you can see, it's putting a load of trackers everywhere, and it's avoiding the areas which we rotoed out. So once that's finished, we're just going to scrub through and have a look for any tracks that look like they're doing anything a bit weird. So if the tracks jump around a lot, you're going to want to just hit delete on these, because they will throw the camera solve out. So I'm not sure whether these are doing the right thing. They seem to be going in the opposite direction to all the other ones. I'll just scrub through. Yep, they're definitely not behaving right, so I'm just going to delete a couple of those from the shot. And just have a look out for any that you think are jumping around and not sticking in the right place. I think we're okay there, so I'm going to hit solve, and this is really quick, it'll just run through pretty much instantly. And with our scene nice and solved, just go to export, select scene and click create, and you'll see it's created a little node layout for you. And in order to make the clean plate work, what we need to do is rebuild this wall of the house with a card in 3D, and we're just going to project on a texture of the house onto that wall, and through the camera that we've just tracked, that wall will stick where it should do, and we can use that to mask out the person who's walked into the shot. So to do that, we're just going to select some of these features which we know are good because they're green. Try and select features that have been in the shot the whole time if you can. Right click them and click create card, and as you can see we've created a card which is basically a plane in 3D where that wall of the house is, and this will make a bit more sense in a minute. So going back to the node graph, you'll see we've got this card, and what we need to do is just pipe that into the scene and add a scanline render node straight after the scene, and we need to just pipe in its corresponding sort of tabs. So the camera tab goes into the camera that we just solved, and the background I'm just going to go into where we finished our rotoscope. So now if we look through the scanline render node, you'll see that it's just black, and that's because the card that we just created is obscuring all of the background footage. So in order to see the background footage, what we need to do is scale this card down. So I'm just going to go into the card node properties, and just in the scale I'm just going to change that to, let's try 0.2, and I'm just going to move this to where the guy walks into the shot, and we need to just scale it up so that it covers the entirety of his move, so from each extreme. So he gets to about this door handle, so I'll scale it up in the y-axis a little bit, and that looks like it's going to cover pretty much everything. You see a bit of his head there, so I'll just move it up a little bit. So just making sure that this guy's entire action is covered by the card. So as you can see, it doesn't fit the edge of the frame here, so I'll just scale it up in the x-axis a little bit and just positioning it a little bit better. And the card looks to be sticking to the wall just perfectly, which will mean that we'll get a nice clean plate from this shot. And the next step we need to do is project on an image of that wall texture to the card. So I'm just going to plug the background tab of the scanline renderer just straight coming from our lens distortion node so we can see the whole frame without any roto, and I'm just going to look for an area where we can see a lot of this wall. So it looks like towards the end of this clip we're seeing the most of the wall, so that's probably the bit I'm going to use. So it looks like around frame 100 we see quite a lot of that wall, so what we need to do now is create a still frame of this wall, and to do that we use a frame hold, and just pipe the frame hold straight from the lens distortion node, and in the node attributes I'm just going to put the first frame to 100, and if we look through this now you'll see that that image is completely stuck at frame 100, and this is the image that we're going to be projecting onto the card. But to use the projection we need a camera which frame is at 100 as well, so we're going to duplicate the camera and just put it sort of neatly in your node graph and double click it. We're going to go to frame 100 and right click all the animated attributes, right click them and just click no animation, and this is basically just creating a separate still camera that we're going to use as our projection camera to project this still onto the card. So once we've got that, the next step is to go in your node graph and create a project 3D node, and you'll see it's got two tabs, one of them's for the camera and one of them's for the image. So one is linked to the still camera we just created and one is linked to the still hold frame that we just created. So if we look at the card in the node graph, it's got an image tab, and we just link the image tab to the project 3D node, and let's have a look through our scanline render, and if you've done it correctly you should see something that looks like this, which is sort of a bright area which is like sort of overlaid on the image, and this is the card that we've just created with our sort of clean plate projected onto it. And obviously this isn't correct at the moment, but we're going to go through how to sort of merge this properly with the footage, but it's working well. You can see that it is actually projecting a clean area, and we've gotten rid of the person who obscures the frame. So if we look at it in 3D, it'll give you a better sense of what's going on. So there you can see our two cameras, and you can see the plane which the image of the wall is projected onto. So I hope that makes sense. So the next thing we're going to do is, because this edge of the card is very sharp, we're going to just feather that off so it will merge better with the original footage. So to quickly do that, I'm just going to drop an erode blur node straight after the scanline render, and straight after that I'm just going to add a pre-multiply node in. And as you can see, we're not seeing anything at the moment, and that's because this transparency box is ticked in the scanline render node, and once we untick this we'll start to see the image that we've just created. So untick it, there we go, our shape with an alpha. So in the erode node, I'm just going to change the channel to alpha, because we just want to erode the alpha of the edge. As you can see, that's the really sharp alpha. And in the pre-multiply node, I'm going to change this to RGBA, which is RGB alpha. So in the erode node, I'm just going to increase the size, not too much, just so it's got a nice rounded edge, and increase the blur. And as you can see, what that's doing is just feathering off this really harsh edge, and that's really going to help the seam when we overlay this on the original footage. But the next thing I'm going to do is just drop a merge node in right at the end and connect the A pipe to our pre-multiply out, and our B pipe to where our lens distortion comes out, and I'll just neaten that up a bit. You can do that by pressing Ctrl on your keyboard and just dragging out one of the little dots. And as you can see, now if we look through that merge node, it looks pretty good. Obviously you want to scrub through and check for problem areas, but from the looks of things, this looks like we painted the guy out quite successfully. So I'll just give that a playthrough for you guys. So as you can see, like magic, we've got rid of the guy that walked into the shot. There is a bit of a problem with one of his juggling balls, it sort of disappears, but we could fix that because it happens at a point where the other guy isn't in the shot, so we could just toggle the mix of the merge node. And finally, just to add an extra little bit of realism, you can see that there is some noise and grain in this footage. It was shot with a cheap DSLR, but in the area which we projected on, this noise and grain is just going to sit still, and this will just make your shot look quite fake, especially if you added colour correction to it, which sort of brought out the contrast of these areas. So what we're going to do is add in a denoise node, and we're going to stick that straight before the erode node. And once we've dragged that in, we're just going to connect both of the pipes to the camera solver node, and in the denoise node, just double click it and look through it and connect it to your viewer, and you'll see it's created this little box in the viewer window, and that's the noise analysis region. So just move it to any area, usually dark areas work better, and click analyze noise, and that's just going to remove all the noise from the shot. And what we're going to do is get some noise from the other footage and reapply that over the top of this one. So to do that, we're just going to select our denoise node, hit tab, and type in f_regrain. And don't worry about what's going on in the viewer for now, we're going to fix that later. But this is a really useful tool. It's useful for adding grain to renders that look a little bit too crisp or perfect. And what it allows you to do is sample the grain from your source footage and put that over the top of footage which doesn't have the grain on it. So in the grain type, we're going to put from grain clip, and we're going to move the little grain pipe just to some footage which we know has some noise in it, which is sort of just anywhere up here. I'm going to connect it directly to the lens distortion node. So if we look through that lens distortion node, we'll see a sample sort of region like we saw earlier. I'm just going to move it to a dark area and hit analyze, and in the grain color space we're going to change that to linear from cineon, which is the default. I'm just going to analyze that again. I'm not sure whether that makes a difference actually, but now if we go back to our regrain node and have a look through that, you'll see that there is some animated grain on it coming from the DSLR footage. And what we're going to do is, using the original footage as reference, we're going to try and just adjust the grain amount and grain size settings just to make sure that it is looking about right. So I'm just going to look through this merge node so we can see both at once, and it looks to me like it might be a little bit big. I'll just cross compare that with the noise on the other side, and this noise does look a little bit more subtle, and I don't think the grains are quite as big. So I'm just going to go into the grain amount, and I'm going to say probably about 3/4 of that, so 0.75. That looks like a good value to me. Obviously you can spend more time getting this perfect if you like, but there you have it, how to do a very basic and easy clean plate. How to re-add the grain. Here is the final node graph layout that you can use as reference if you've got confused at any point. But once again, thank you for tuning in. This has been the YellowDog 3D Tips blog. I've been Joe Daw from Glued Films. Cheers!